Good afternoon, and welcome to this ADA panel presentation this afternoon. And I'm going to just briefly give you the names of the panelists, and then what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a little opening statement, and I'm going to allow each panel to come forward and give their brief presentation. We will allow 15 minutes at the end for questions, so I do ask you to hold your questions, okay? But on the panel, we have Dara Baldwin.
Hi,
We have
everyone.
Taryn Williams. We have Talila Lewis. With those L's, I just get so, she likes TL, and I think I do too. And then we have Rebecca Coakley and Martin Baez.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. They will tell you more about themselves when they take their turn to speak. But standing here today, I can't help but remember a young man who was born in 1945 in Timminsville, South Carolina. They called him Boy. That was the only name he had, while his other brothers had names like Willie James, Henry Laverne, Valentine. His name was Boy. Boy never spoke. Boy only made sounds. Yet he understood certain commands. You could say, boy, sit, boy, eat, boy, no. Now, I don't know if he was deaf. I don't know if he was mentally retarded. And I don't know if he was autistic. He came into this world through the hands of a midwife. There was no testing, no doctors, and early on in his young life, it was assumed that he did not have the capacity to learn and fulfill dreams. Boy never went to school. Who knows if he could have learned? Who knows if he could have excelled? His life was centered around a small house in a small yard in rural South Carolina. They dared not allow him to stray from the yard because Jim Crow was strongest in Timminsville. And Boy could not read and therefore would not know the meaning of white only or colored signs. He would undoubtedly lose his life because of his blackness and his disability. He would never understand the importance of the Brown versus the Board of Education case in 1954. He would not know about the battles and struggles waged for equal education. He would not know about the bloodshed and the death leading up to the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act. How would one explain to him that the night riders in white robes and white hoods would soon be adorned in business suits, sitting on the floor of the Senate and the Congress, or wearing uniforms, no longer riding at night, but now riding in broad daylight, and quick to blame a disability as the reason to fear, to kill, to arrest, and to incarcerate? If he had lived while people with disabilities were transforming their own civil rights issues into the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, would he have wanted to join these advocate groups? Would he have been accepted? Or would he have been excluded based on not based on his disability, but based on his blackness? The 1990 American Disabilities Act with the 1973 Rehabilitation Act covers all government-funded programs and extends that civil right protection for people with disabilities into the private sector. Boy would never know about that. Boy grew up and died in Timminsville, South Carolina. He died a teenager, never having an opportunity to pursue his own potentials or dreams, while I and my other 6 siblings may have struggled with the hardship of being black and poor, to get a better education, and to earn a living to support our families. We did not have to face the triple whammy of being black, poor, and disabled. We did not have to face the strange looks, the tones of pity, or insensitive comments, which were always present when we took Boy to the store and even when we took him to church. Yes, in 2015, I still wonder, what would his life be like today? I may never know, but today I am thankful that I am a member of a civil rights organization that recognizes the necessity to include in its annual convention the discussion on disability as a civil rights issue. So to my baby brother, Boy, and all the boys before him and after him, I stand here on your behalf, ready to moderate this important discussion, believing that once we begin, there will be no turning back. This will be the beginning of many more conversations to keep the disability civil rights issues in the mainstream of civil rights discussion. Again, welcome, my brothers and sisters, to ADA at the intersections of justice, fighting for the rights of all. And now, the 1990 American with Disabilities Act was signed into law some 25 years ago, yet we know statistical data confirms that there's still a large disparity between persons with disabilities and those without disabilities as it relates to education, employment, housing, and unfair practices of our legal and justice systems. That's just to name a few. But even within that disproportionate number, there is yet another disproportionate number as it relates to African Americans and people of color and their white counterparts. So I asked this panel, and they will go one at a time, from your perspective, what do you see are some of the challenges that African Americans and people of color with disabilities face in order to remove barriers for their progress? And we can begin with Dara. You want to come up or you want to sit there?
Well, I'll sit here. I'm sure. Thank you. Okay. Again, thank you everyone for having us here today. Peace and blessings to all my people in the room. I want to give a shout out and thanks to Nan, Reverend Al, Janae, and staff, and the community here, all the civil rights and social justice activists. We work together, and I'm glad to be a part of this. I am a public policy analyst for the National Disability Rights Network. I have information in the back on who we are. There's a pamphlet here with our website. If you want to contact me, you can do that and send me an email or anything back there. We are at www.ndrn.org. We are on Twitter and Facebook, NDRN advocates. We're in the 21st century here, so we got to do these kinds of things. And last but not least, we are today tweeting. Thank you, Lawrence, back there. We're using the hashtag NANDIS, so NAN Disability, and then, of course, the regular hashtag for this conference. The National Disability Rights Network is a network of protection and advocacy centers around the country. Back in 1976, right here in New York, Geraldo Rivera cut his teeth on the Willingboro case, where there were children who were in institutions being treated incorrectly, children and adults, neglect and abuse. And from that, Senator Javits created the P&A system. And every state, there are 56 of them, so every state and every territory has the P&A, and then we created a new one in the late 80s for the Native American community. They have their own. So, and that's what we're here to talk today about, the intersection of race and disability and the things that we do here. I work very closely with everyone on this panel, except for Martin, who I just met today. It's great to meet another person in the movement, but we all work together on national levels, but I'm also a grassroots person. I've been doing social justice all of my life. And I came into the disability community in 2009. So that's just a little bit about me. What we do as a protection and advocacy program is about around abuse and neglect. And we started with just developmental disability, but we moved into covering all of disabilities. We cover all disabilities, physical, mental, emotional disabilities. And what was said in the opening, we have seen that the community of color, that being black and brown people, that being people of international descent who come here, are treated very much differently than any other group. And so a lot of our work is based around that community. We are one of the few national organizations that is a disability rights organization that works in a criminal justice realm. We also work in the juvenile justice realm. We are one of the organizations that kind of stopped and are helping to stop solitary confinement, the imprisonment of youth, and not letting them continue with their IDEA, which is Individuals with Disability Education Act. Those rights need to stay forward. I'm just going to talk a little bit about that because down the panel, my colleagues will talk more about the criminal justice community and what's going on there. They are experts on that. I do this as well. But that's one of the areas we work on. Our lawyers do cases, about 10,000 cases a year just on juvenile justice. It's amazing what is happening to our children in the prison system, and we need to end that. We also have convened what's called the Civil Rights and Disability Rights Roundtable in Washington, D.C. We have organizations on there like the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, the Lawyers Committee, Legal Defense Fund, MALDEF, which is MALDEF, which is the Mexican American Legal Defense Education Fund, NCAI, which is the National Congress on American Indians, HRC, and LGBT organizations as well. So we kind of get together and we're talking about these issues. One issue we're taking up right now is in reference to ESEA, which is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And this is where it really affects us. Most of the children who are identified in this country as having a disability are children of color. And we need to acknowledge that. And we need to bring together civil rights organizations. Many of the organizations I just named have been speaking here all week. I was here since Tuesday. Barbara Arwine was here from the Lawyers Committee, Janelle George, and many of the young ladies and men who work at the Legal Defense Fund were here. Wade Henderson was here from the Leadership Conference. So we work together with the Leadership Conference and all of those civil rights organizations. One area we're working on is trying to get school climate and the STPP, which is the School to Prison Pipeline, as a forefront, that those are the children who are getting put out of school, not getting their education, and they are children of color who have disabilities. So we work on that, and that is one of the big issues for our organization. Our lawyers, unfortunately, that is a huge amount of their cases, and it's sad. At the intersection of diversity and cultural competency, I will tell you, it is missing in Washington, D.C. You are very blessed to be in a community of NAN around the country who are working together and around people of color. There are 120-something disability advocacy organizations in the Washington, D.C. area. There's a group called CCD, the Consortiums for Citizens with Disabilities, and my panelists here are going to close their ears because they hear me saying this over and over again. I am the only person of color, who does policy. Did everybody hear that? No Latinos, no Asians, no Native Americans who work on policy at this organization. And it is a crying shame because I have to sit in a room and constantly say, that is not going to work for our children. That's not going to work for our community. You need to listen to us. There's something to be said about cultural competency and diversity and the intersection of disability and all of the other things, sexual orientation, religion. There are people who are being abused because of their faith. This is wrong. And so we need to have this, and this is why we want to have this conversation and develop our relationship with this community and many other civil rights communities. The last thing I'm going to bring up, because I know my panelists will bring up the other information, is something that is new and kind of current. This RFRA, the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, everyone know what that is and what happened in Indiana? Correct. On the news, all you heard about is how it discriminates against the LGBT community. And I love my LGBT community. But that law and the way it was written would discriminate against a whole lot of people. And even without REFRA, people with disabilities, and especially people of color with disabilities, are already being discriminated against. There are organizations and religions that find dogs to be unholy. And you all know that a person with a disability, whether they're blind, mental illness, they may have emotional disorders or things like that, need their service animals, and they're usually dogs. And they don't allow them in their taxi cabs, they don't allow them in their restaurants, they don't allow them in their stores. That is already happening based on their faith. That is illegal, it is wrong. The ADA covers this. They also happens in reference to people who think that people with cerebral palsy or MS or something, they don't like the way they look, and they say, we don't want you in our restaurant, don't come in here, don't sit here, we don't want you in our cab, in our car. 2 years ago, we fought to get pool lifts. The Department of Justice put a rule out, and the comments that came in reference to having pools, and if I swim with someone who has cerebral palsy, I might get cerebral palsy. And that is in 2012. It is ridiculous. It is illegal, and it is wrong. And our people of color, it is happening to them all the time. And don't be at the intersection of a person of color with a disability, with a faith that is not Christian. Don't be a Muslim. Don't be a Sikh. Don't be a Buddhist. Don't be a Jew. And have all of those things. You are discriminated every day. So when you hear these things in the news, this is what we want you to remember. I look forward to working with Nan, not only, today, all year long, and I hope to be back next year and have this disability rights panel. The last thing I'm going to say, the work that you do every day, just like when we did cultural competency and diversity, I worked on that. I am this old, this is a second career for me, that you must include that in your conversation. It must be underlined. When you go and say you're going to fight for rights of a young man who just got arrested at the prison or got shot at or whatever, include people with disabilities. When you're talking about policy to your city leaders, your county leaders, your state leaders, talk about disability. It is not a separate pot. It is to be talked together, and that is what we're looking for. We're here to help you. If you need anything, please contact me. Oh, well. I'm sorry. We do have a project. It's called AVID. It's called AVID, A-V-I-D, Applying Voices of Inmates with Disabilities. We are the only organization, the only lawyers who can go into a facility unannounced. We can walk wherever we want, the P&A systems. We can talk to whoever we want. And we are now going to start taking video cameras into the prisons and start taping the horrendous and horrific ways in which people with disabilities are treated. If you want to know about it, the sheet is in the back. It's called AVID.
Well, thank you so much, Dara. That is a lot to digest. But I am so glad to hear you say some of the things that you have said, and I am sure that from Nan's perspective, and we certainly have a number of committees in National Action Network that will be dealing with you in the future. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to go to Martin. Martin, do you remember the question? Yes.
Which one?
Okay. Okay, that's all right. That's all right. Okay, from your perspective, what do you see as some of the challenges that African Americans and people of color with disabilities face in order to remove barriers for their progress?
My name is Martin Byers. I'm the chair of the Housing Committee for the New York City chapter of the National Action Network. And one thing I could tell you, that because of your perception of us, we're not only discriminated once, we're discriminated twice because of our color and because of our disability, and maybe even because of your perception. So that's 3 times. I find it barbarically very disrespectful that animals have more rights than we do. I find it barbarically disrespectful when you're in a home that they leave you in feces and urine for hours. But yet, if you do it to an animal, it's called animal abuse. What is it called when you do it to a person with disabilities? That's barbaric and very socially irresponsible. I also find it, people often ask me, why is it that, people with disabilities have such a hardship? Well, let me tell you. In 2001, I started working at the city council, at City Hall. There's 51 council members. I was the only staffer who was a wheelchair user. That's strange. How is it that you have 51 council members and there's only one person in City Hall who's a wheelchair user? I was there from 01 to 09. Guess how many wheelchair users they have now? 0. Once I left, that was it. When you go to Albany, how many wheelchair users do you think is on the staff with the elected officials? I haven't seen any. Even when you go to Capitol Hills, how many people you could say honestly that you've seen when you go into their office, a person with a cane, a walker, or a wheelchair, or even a motorized chair? None. Is that by mistake, or is that by design? That's the question we need to start asking. We need to start fighting back. We need to start challenging the status quo. We need to become the boogeyman for the status quo. There's a status quo that doesn't allow us forward movement. There's a status quo that wants to negate and hinder our progress. And why? Because of your perception of us? What have we done to you that we don't have equal opportunity like you do? Where is the democracy in that? To deny people equal opportunity because of your perception. But what about my perception of you? I was speaking to Sister Dawn the other day, and we had a lengthy conversation over the phone. And one of the things I said to her, I said, I didn't come here to sugarcoat. I didn't come here to be politically correct. I'm not a politician, and I don't have a 501c3. So they can't come after me. They can't deny me discretionary funds. I don't have no organization. And they can't fire me because I don't work for them. So I decided in 2009 that I was going to be an activist for people with disabilities. Not only for people with disabilities, but for seniors. I have a case right now in court. For those of you who live in Harlem, last year the MTA and DOT decided that they were going to take the M60 bus, the LaGuardia Airport bus, and turn it into a SBS, Select Bus Service. If I'm coming from 135th Street and 7th Avenue, I have to take the M2 to 125th Street, then transfer to the 101, the 100, or the BX15 to go to Lenox, pay again, and then go to LaGuardia Airport. So not only do I have to face physical hardship, but I also have to face financial hardship. And let me tell you, they constantly, what they do is they sabotage the truth by trying to brainwash you. And the only reason why they do that is because they assume that we don't know any better. Their perception of us is that we don't read, and because we don't read, we don't know. So they figure they could come into our community and rearrange our furniture by gentrification because they figure them Negroes don't know any better. Whatever, all we got to do is use big words, fancy words, and make them believe that those fancy words have their best interest at heart. It really doesn't. And when they use fancy words, my advice to you is to run as fast as you can. Because that fancy word means one thing. Bend over because I'm about to screw you over. That's the only thing it means. Let me tell you, there's a plan right now in NYCHA. In Harlem, there's going to be at least over 1,000 families that's going to be evicted. And I'm going to tell you why. If your grandmother, if there's a child in that apartment and he has a felony or he commits a crime, they evict everyone. If you can't deal with a 16-year-old, how do you think a 70-year-old is going to stand up to a 16-year-old? But yet they evict everyone. And the crazy thing about that is they don't replace you. They don't replace those units with a black or brown or Latino family. They replace those units with other. It's funny how when I want to travel, it could take me up to an hour or more to get a taxi cab. An able-bodied person don't have those issues. I stand on the corner, and you don't know how many accessible taxis just constantly drive past me and ignore me. So then the question is why? Why does that happen? Because of their perception. And you know why we are the way we are? Because they know that people with disabilities are on fixed income. People with disability can't contribute to their campaigns like everyone else with a job. That's what they think. You're right. But also, if you have a job that makes $100,000, they take away your medical benefits because they say you make too much. So my question is, how is it that you're trying to afford me to be free and to be equal when as soon as I get a degree and I get a job, you take away my access? So we have to have the dialogue, and I'm glad that Reverend Sharpton, the National Action Network, decided to include this panel because often people look at us like we have the cooties, like we're contaminated. What's the difference between my cooties and your cooties? Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And I think that one of the things that Martin brought out, and even if he said a lot, but I think what you saw, I think if you looked at what you was listening to, what you saw was a lot of pain and a lot of frustration of one person, what a person has to go through in not only this city, but probably around the country because of a disability. Thank you, Martin. Okay, we're now going to go to Taryn Williams.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Taryn Williams, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'll spend some time answering the questions. It's hard to follow Martin, but I'll try. So up until about 2 weeks ago, I served as the Associate Director for Public Engagement and Liaison to the Disability Community for the White House. And effective next week, I'll be a Chief of Staff at an agency within the Department of Labor. A lot of the work that I've done over the last, I'd say, 10, 12 years has been with the disability community in a variety of different perspectives, being from a federal agency like the Department of Labor, from the White House. I spent some time working with Senator Harkin, a disability champion, on the Senate Help Committee, and I also many years ago worked with Rebecca Coakley on the other side, who you'll hear from, at a small nonprofit in DC where I first got my start in, it's called the Institute for Educational Leadership. I'm going to speak from those experiences, but I'm going to speak personally. I think for all of you all who are in the room, you recognize that when I say I'm speaking personally, that means don't attribute it to the government agencies for which I work. The question was, what are some of those barriers that individuals confront, particularly African Americans with disabilities? And you all already heard the answers. In the work that I've done, particularly in the last year working with the White House, I would say that there are three things that we continue to face as a community, even though we are now 25 years out from the passage of the ADA. And those three things are our continued unemployment, education, and the lack of community living. If you look at what the goals of the ADA were, then equal opportunity, economic self-sufficiency, like the full participation in community life, we haven't reached that. And it's not just true of the disability community, but if you were quite narrowly going to look at the African American community, then you would see the same thing. Speaking about employment, even though as a government agency we don't often talk about it, since the passage of the ADA, people with disabilities, the employment rates have not changed. So if you look around this country, you see that people with disabilities are unemployed, they are underemployed, which means they're working in jobs that are not commensurate with the degrees that they have earned, or they're not even in the workforce. That means they've given up. It might be because of what you heard from Martin, which is that if they want to get the job that they need, the job that will help them to meet all of their aspirations, they might be giving up the opportunity to get Medicaid, so access to the health insurance that they need to get around, or it might just mean that there are so many attitudinal barriers in place that employers aren't willing to give them an opportunity to show what their skills and knowledge is. But it's not just education. We see the same problems in employment. Or rather, it's not just employment. We see the same problems in education, which is that if you are an individual with a disability, then you are more likely to drop out of high school. You are less likely to go on to college. If you do go on to college, you're not likely to persist to earn your degree. If you do have more opportunities to go into the workforce, but it just doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because there are not the types of supports and services that we need to have in place for people to be successful. And that final piece, the one that I don't think we spend enough time talking about, is community living. It is by and far a travesty that oftentimes the option that is available, particularly for low-income families that don't have access to that same capital, the social capital, the relationships, the knowledge of how the system works, that the option that they have for an individual in their family is to put them in an institution. It's not to stay at home with your family. It's not to be in your community with your friends. It's not to be in a relationship. It's not to be able to learn and earn and play the way other Americans do. It's to be in an institution, in feces, in a room. Like, community living is something that we have not yet achieved in this country for people with disabilities. And for each of these three things, for employment, for education, and for community living, it is very poor for people with disabilities, but it is especially so for African Americans with disabilities, which gets to where we start to find solutions. And the solutions are exactly what Martin said, which is there is no us or them. Speaking from what I observed over the last year in particular, when we talk about the civil rights community, we don't talk about the civil rights community as being inclusive of disability. We say the civil rights community, oh, and the disability groups. Time and time again, we would have to fight to say, when you say civil rights, you do mean people with disabilities as well. I've seen this work well. Something that I know many in this room, all in this room, are familiar with is what happened last summer and the formation of the 21st Century Task Force on Policing. That is something concretely where we really did see the disability community stand up, and it wasn't just because it was a horrible thing that happened, but it's because we know that when you talk about poor policing strategies and poor law enforcement protocols in this country, that it's not just about African Americans who are dying or just getting shot, like what happened last week, but there are individuals with mental health conditions, there are individuals with developmental disabilities that get shot going to the movies, there are individuals with physical disabilities because law enforcement does not understand they don't have the training, they don't have the resources, they do not understand particular disabilities, and they don't have the ability to work with both, as Darryl will often say, it's not just individuals who may be alleged suspects, but also victims who have disabilities. And what we find is that when you are a person with a disability and you're coming into contact with the criminal justice system, you are very likely to face discrimination. But when it came to the creation of that task force, the disability community stood up. They said, this is not just about them, this is not just Black problem, it's a problem that faces all of us, and we want to make sure that we are there and we are making our voices heard. And in terms of solution, I think that's what we need to continue to do. Not thinking about, oh, let's include disability, but oh, disability is already part of us. Because as a community, it confronts us every day. You know likely that disability is something that you can age into at any point in your life. Disability is a group that you can come into or out of at any point in your life. So oftentimes we think of disability, I hate this term, as being that special thing over there. And so you put it on what a colleague of mine will say, the special shelf, and you don't always have to think about it. But the fact is, it does affect you. And until we start breaking down those barriers and thinking about how is this affecting me, and what does this mean for not just me, but my friends and my family and the world that they want to live in, until we do that, then all of these problems that we confront, particularly in employment and education, that will continue to be the case.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm telling you, we're going to have our work cut out for us, and I think we better be ready for the challenge. I'm going to now go to Rebecca Coakley.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Coakley. I'm the Executive Director of the National Council on Disability. NCD is a 36-year-old independent federal agency that's tasked with advising Congress and the White House on all issues of disability public policy. So this week, for example, I spent 4 hours working on voting rights, 7.5 hours working on parenting rights, 2 hours working on STEM, 8 hours working on criminal justice, and then a significant period of time working on reproductive health issues facing people with disabilities. The council is responsible, actually, and it's funny because I don't know if this joke will resonate with this audience. The council actually did write the first draft of the Americans with Disabilities Act in coordination with Bob Bergdorf when he was the dean at UDC Law School. And in the ADA, we laid out the framework of full participation, equality of opportunity, economic self-sufficiency, and independent living. Those were the goals of the ADA. And those goals had a champion that often doesn't get a lot of credit for the work that he did. And that and that champion was, New York's own Congressman Major Owens, who is in a lot of ways, who should be given more credit as one of the founding fathers of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And years later, about 7 years after the ADA passed, I think this is important as we have the conversation about the nexus of race and disability. The Congress was taking up the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act for a reauthorization. And at the time, the mobility disability groups came to the congressman and said, we want you to take learning disabilities out of IDEA. We don't think those folks should have the same protections that we have. Because what that has led to is special education becoming a dumping ground for every bad kid in a school. And Major sat back and looked at them, and with the twinkle in his eye that he had right before he would tell somebody exactly what he thought of them, Major said, over my dead body will I ever institute a paper bag test on a civil rights law. And it's a powerful statement. And that's something that we continue to struggle with in the disability community. We're talking about the community as a whole is kind of a joke. You're talking about a community of 54 million people, where literally if one of you takes a fall outside today, you join us. Where we represent roughly 1 in 4 Americans. So you got, let's see, 5 of us up here on a panel, 6 of us up here. So I'm guessing there are at least 10, 20 of you in the audience that we may or may not know. Your disability may or may not be apparent. When I come up here, you guys see me as a little person. It's kind of obvious. You don't know that I have a heart condition, which makes me have a rapid heartbeat every so often. You don't know that during my adolescence, I had obsessive compulsive disorder and used to wash my hands 200 times a day. You don't know the fact that I am the mother of 2 amazing African American children with dwarfism. Jackson, who is 4.5 going on 15,
Yeah.
and who plans
Really?
to intern for Assemblyman Blake at some point in the near future. He thinks he's doing it next summer. And my daughter Kaya, who is 1 and took her first steps towards a rack of $1,200 Burberry bags, which really scares me. But the world that they're going to grow up in as African American children with disabilities is going to be so different than the world that I grew up in. In 1990, when I walked into my when I walked into my high school in 93, my high school guidance counselor looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, miss, kids like you don't go here." That was 3 years after the ADA was passed. When my son Jackson was born in 2010, he ended up having to go to the NICU because he was born premature. And my husband, who is a very proud Howard grad, any Howard grads in the room, he would ask me to check. Okay. He's not here, but he always reminds me to check. At Georgetown Hospital, the doctor looked at my husband, looked him up and down, and said, "Excuse me, sir, but how much education do you have?" And that was in 2010. I have never had my husband call me so angry before in the 10 years of our relationship. But they saw him, they saw that he was a person with an apparent disability, they saw that he was an African American man, and they didn't think he knew what he was talking about. And when we talk, the reason I lead in with this story is one of the big issues that we're working on right now at the National Council on Disability is the civil rights of parents with disabilities. Right now in 37 states, if you're a parent with a disability, you can lose custody of your child solely for having any type of disability. You could have been in grief counseling over the loss of a loved one or a parent. You could have PTSD coming back from service overseas. You could use a wheelchair. You could have a developmental disability. And no other basis could be used to rescind your custody of your child, of the child that you gave birth to or the child that you're raising, except for the fact that you have a disability. And we know, anecdotally, we don't have the hard data, but we know that this is disproportionately affecting the African American and the Latino communities. And part of the challenge that we're running into is that we're not hearing about a lot of these cases because of the stigma of disability in minority communities. So one of the things that we're actively encouraging folks to do is, as we talk about disability, talk about disability. Disability is not a scary thing. Disability is a term of civil rights. When you use disability, you access civil rights protections. I'm going to tell you another secret. The words special needs, handy-capable, differently abled, those words do not exist in a single piece of civil rights protections in this country. If you use those words, they're not entitled to provide you with reasonable accommodations. If you Google special needs in the ADA, it's nowhere in the ADA. It's not in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, but disability is. So as we have conversations about disability, owning disability, not allowing the stigma to make us fear it like it's the monster underneath the bed, as some other disability organizations might have you believe. And as we talk about the parenting rights piece, it really is a critical piece. And it's a piece that the civil rights movement has been involved in since before we started working on it. Fannie Lou Hamer had polio, and Fannie Lou was sterilized in her early 20s against her will because her OBGYN did not think she would be a fit parent because she had polio. She didn't find out until she and her husband got married and decided to have babies, and she couldn't get pregnant. So she went to specialist, and finally somebody was like, "Well, ma'am, I hate to tell you, your tubes have been tied." And she said, "What?" And so she reached back and got in touch with her old OBGYN, who said, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't think people like you should have children." So this is an issue that goes back years and years and years. You know, we know that this is a significant issue. And as you, even moving beyond that into having children, I mean, I saw the data, I don't know if you guys have seen it recently, but the data in New York City preschools, where you had 1,000 children suspended in New York City preschools, and I think it was 2013 was the most recent data, and they estimated that roughly 60% of them were children with disabilities. How are you going to suspend a preschooler? I have a preschooler. You know, there's days yeah. But the school to prison pipeline is real, and we're not going to be able to do anything about it unless the disability community comes to the table and has the frank conversation about race, and unless the diversity communities come to the table and are willing to have the conversation about disability. Because as Taryn said, we know our kids are 50% more likely to drop out. They're 3 times as likely to be in foster care. They're 4 times as likely to live in poverty, and they're 6 times as likely to end up in the juvenile justice system. It's easy to see that that's the outcome if you're starting with suspending 1,000 preschoolers. So this conversation is an ongoing conversation that we need to have. And I'm thrilled to see the National Action Network actually having this as a topic. This is the first year we've been invited to speak on a panel on disability rights. And I hope its brother and sister organizations will take into account that this is a direction that they need to go into as well as we move into the future. The last piece that I would really just touch on really quick is, as we're having the conversation around police violence, as Taryn indicated, it is something that's impacting the intersection of race and disability significantly. Whether it be Ernest Griglin, who died of diabetic shock in police custody, Antonio Love, who was deaf and repeatedly pepper sprayed, Jimmy Powell, Zell Ford, and obviously Eric Gardner. Eric Gardner's last act was declaring his disability, was saying, I cannot breathe, making a protected claim under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so as we're having this conversation about law enforcement, and as Taryn said, it's been a phenomenal opportunity to be able to weigh in with the White House Task Force on 21st Century Policing, particularly on this issue. I think it's critical that any training that law enforcement get include a history of mental health systems nationally and locally, and specifically the effects of stigma within communities of color. I'm really excited right now to see that our colleagues from the National Association on Mental Illness, NAMI, has just entered into an agreement with, I think now they're working with 7 of the Divine 9 at HBCUs around the country and at other colleges and universities to work on the stigma of mental health in the Black community, and including how you engage with law enforcement component on that work. Our colleagues at the Bazelon Center for Mental Health has done a phenomenal job working on this issue, particularly in the San Antonio and the South Texas area, as it impacts the Latino community. But we can't be afraid to raise disability as an issue in this conversation on the 21st, the work around the 21st century policing. We need to see, a friend of mine actually just emailed me the other day and said, I'm in East Oakland, and the family down the street is fighting again, and their son is home from the mental health hospital. And I have to tell you, I'm in tears. And I said, well, oh God, what happened? And she said, no, Oakland PD sent out a mental health crisis unit with the cops. This is the first time they've done that. And one of the best practices we know works is tag teaming mental health professionals from the autistic community with law enforcement, so that law enforcement isn't going into this alone, and they actually have the experts at the table to help resolve and diffuse the situations from the beginning. So I think there really is the opportunity for more of an intersectional dialogue, and we at the National Council, and I know my colleagues on the panel, really welcome the opportunity to continue that dialogue going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to Leah Lewis.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Talila, T-A-L-I-L-A, last name Lewis, L-E-W-I-S, sign name TL. I'd like to begin by centering the space. A few names have been uplifted of people who have been murdered by law enforcement. I want to uplift a couple of other names in this space before I begin. Milton Hall, M-I-L-T-O-N-H-A-L-L. Michelle Cusseaux, last name C-U-S-S-E-A-U-X. Jason Harrison, Laval Hall, Anthony Hill. I could go on and on and on. often what you all hear from news media and even from within our own community is that these are people who were black who were murdered by the police. All of that is very true. These people also had disabilities, different kinds of disabilities, whether they were people living with mental illness, people who were in psychiatric episodes at the time in which they were murdered. It's important to acknowledge and not erase a part of each individual's identity. So for instance, myself, I am black, yes. I am also disabled. I am also queer. And I am all of those things at the exact same time. And what that means is our collective liberation as black people is uniquely and inextricably tied to all of our identities. So the word that hasn't been uplifted in this space is intersectionality. Intersectionality means that we can't fight for justice for one group of people or one identity in which we all obtain, which clearly we're talking about people of color, black or brown people, but we have to fight for the liberation of every person based on all parts of their identity simultaneously. And if we aren't doing that, then we aren't actually fighting for civil rights. We can't compartmentalize. Coretta Scott King and Malcolm and Martin have all spoken to all of these different issues, and I think it's really important to uplift those names in this space as well as we move forward. I think the key barriers to addressing the issue at hand here are structural racism in society writ large, and structural ableism and autism in the black and brown communities. Ableism is discrimination based on someone's level of ability, its acceptance of what we perceive as quote unquote normal as society deems it, which since we question race as a black community, we know that that was something that was handed down by oppressors and we should not accept it as it's been given to us. We should also question what is normal? What does disability actually mean? And for me, and many, many people with disabilities, disability is pride. I'm proud of my disabilities just like I'm proud of my blackness. I think it's important to note that the legal profession is laden with structural ableism, structural racism, structural autism. I didn't give the definition of autism. Autism is discrimination based on your level of hearing. It's uplifting speaking and hearing over seeing with your hands, or hearing with your hands, or hearing with your eyes, and using some sort of visual communication, or sometimes relying on other accommodations to communicate. Really, really important that we don't normalize hearing and uplift hearing as some better way of being as being deaf. There's nothing to be ashamed of with being deaf. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And in fact, I should mention that many people who are deaf do not identify as people with disabilities. Deafness is a culture, it's a way of being, it's a way of life. Really, really important to uplift in this space also. I want to thank you all for being present with me in this moment. I think when we look at what our communities can do if we come together, the Americans with Disabilities Act provides for law enforcement to take a step back before they reduce themselves to lethal force against our community. That's what the ADA says. Title II of the ADA applies to police officers, and it says, before you resort to lethal force, you need to assess whether or not this person has a disability. You take a step back, you assess the situation, you bring in a critical intervention team if you need. You do not murder a person without first assessing the situation. If we as a black community were to call upon the same laws that are used to protect the rights of people with disabilities, how amazing could that be? How many Scott Walkers could that save? How many Mike Browns could that save? Doesn't matter whether or not somebody has a disability. The instant that a police officer starts to think, oh, well, maybe this person has a disability, maybe I should step back, take a step, that's few more seconds of life for people in one of my identity classes, a few more seconds of life, maybe in a couple of my identity classes, probably in many. And that's what I think is really important to bring to the table here. This is not about, you know, and I want to address, the last thing I'll address, there's so many things I want to share with you all, clearly. But the last thing I want to address is we really have to unpack these statistics, right? So when we talk about the unemployment rate, in my deaf community, in the deaf community, we have an unemployment rate of over 70%. There is no reason for that. Deaf people are amply capable of doing everything that hearing people can do, including here. But let's unpack that. Let's go a little bit further. And I could break down all the statistics that have been fed to you all for so long. Really what we're looking at when we're talking about the deaf community and the unemployment rate, and the same with the disability community and the unemployment rate, and even in education, we've got to really unpack statistics. Don't just accept what they feed you, right? We're talking about black and brown deaf people who are disproportionately unemployed and underemployed, and white deaf people are using the statistic to bolster their, you know, let's get some funding in, and we support, you know, white deaf employment and not black and brown deaf employment. That's not acceptable. The same holds true with disability statistics on employment. The same holds true with education statistics. Of our babies in prison, 78% of the young ladies in prison right now have mental illness. It makes no sense. We cannot address mass incarceration without first addressing the issue of disability and without first addressing, simultaneously, racism. The Supreme Court just took up the Sheehan case. Sheehan is a woman who is not black and is not, well, she might be brown. We haven't really figured that quite out. I think she is a person of color.
Yes.
But not important. The important part of this particular case was that this woman has mental illness. She lives with the mental illness. Police officers, it's eerily similar to all of the cases that you all hear all the time about police officers walking into black people's houses, murdering them in their own houses, for no reason but that they were afraid, that they posed some sort of imminent threat to their life. Unarmed black people in their own homes, murdered. Sheehan was in her own home, which happened to be a community-based living center, which we all promote. So she was living in her own home. Police officers were called because she was having a psychiatric episode. Police officers shot her 5 times, and luckily she survived. This is a grandmother. She was shot 5 times, survived, and the Supreme Court just took up the case this past month, and Justice Sonia Sotomayor said, you know, I feel like the Americans, and of course, the debate at the Supreme Court, there was a lot of fun mumbo-jumbo thrown around by a lot of intellectual pontificators. Whole other story. But the one thing that I want to leave you with is this, right? So Sonia Sotomayor kind of infused some humanity back into the proceeding. And Sonia Sotomayor says, you know, isn't the Americans with Disabilities Act intended to ensure that police officers try to mitigate in these situations before they jump to violence? And isn't that what we should be looking for? And I think at the end of the day, that's what we're all looking for. We want another moment of breath for Eric Garner. We don't want him to say, I can't breathe. We want him to live. We don't want to bury any more people. I don't want to be using any more hashtags on Twitter. I can't do it. We're done. We're finished. We're really finished. And that's what we have to realize. We are all in this together. Collective liberation should be the theme of the year, the rest of your lives. And disability pride, please take that with you. There's nothing wrong with being disabled, and so long as our community continues to look down upon people with disabilities, people who are deaf, we're not going to get where we need to be as a community. And I think that's what needs to be left at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. Okay, now, there may be some people with questions for our panelists. Okay? Do we have a mic? Or?
Yes, mic is, yes, your mic
Okay.
is coming.
The mic is coming. We're over here.
I don't know, someone.
Okay, but right here. I think you were first. Okay, I saw your hand. And then we have, okay.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a question.
Okay.
One of the problems that any community has is being seen. And if you look at primetime television, there is only one disabled person on any of the major networks, and to a degree, I think most of the cable channel. I can tell you the character because it's only the one. That's NCIS New Orleans, the guy in the wheelchair who does some of the technology things. Problem is with this is that disabled people are not seen in the general society. So perhaps there should be some effort at marketing, advertising, branding to say disabled people are Americans too. Because until you see that, everyone seems to think that the ADA Act fixed everything. No, it didn't. It's actually aged out now. It's 25 years old. And
Okay, what, you have a question though for
my
the panel? Okay.
question to you is that how do you marshal the resources that, number one, we can be seen in the greater community and therefore get taken more seriously? And secondly, how do you marshal the resources so that we begin to have a voice in the society?
You got it.
Okay.
Speaking on behalf of a community that has excelled at getting our faces on television, whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing. I know little people are everywhere, man. And we got an Emmy now. That's kind of a big deal.
Yes.
Yeah, Tyrion Lannister, man, Peter Dinklage, doing it for little people. I think, and I'm looking at my communications guy in the back of the room, my guru, Lawrence Carter Long, on all things media. But I would say that there is not a shortage of actors. There is not a shortage of people who want work. And I'm thrilled to see Chill Mitchell on NCIS New Orleans, and I actually would tell people to be really vocal about his role on there, because people don't realize he's on it right now. People aren't talking about it. A little bit here and there on social media. I saw a couple tweets about it the other night, but I actually didn't realize he was back on there. But I think the challenge isn't with finding quality actors. I think the challenge is finding directors and writers and producers that want to be authentic about the portrayal of disability. You know, there is no shortage. I mean, I think I could probably go out on the street, throw a rock, and hit a disabled actor. Probably, wouldn't you say, Lawrence? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I think that there is such a challenge in breaking the mold. And I think part of the problem is when we talk about the disability employment problem, the same thing exists in the media. Where do you see people with disabilities? We're in food service, filing, fetching, flowers, folding, filth, festive, because my people love to elf, and friendly, meaning we're greeters at stores.
Yeah.
The same society is basing roles off of what it sees in reality. So we need to see an elevation of quality roles being written about characters with disabilities. We need to see, you know, Switched at Birth gets a lot of credit in the deaf community because of the number of deaf actors and actresses it employs. But then the disability community got pushed back on Glee when we got mad that they had a starring role of a kid in a wheelchair who got up and walked in his first episode.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Dave, you had, and then it was, okay, it was, he was set, yeah. And then it was, and then I will come to you because they did, okay? Okay, okay, and we'll get over here. Okay. Okay. Go ahead. Come on, come on.
I have a question for all of you, but it's more directly to the men that was working in the city council. When you was in the city council, did you familiarize yourself with the accessorized services for the city? And the reason why I'm asking that is because I'm a user of Accessoride, and it constantly ticks me off the way they treat not only the disabled people, but the elderly people in New York City.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is because every time they
Okay,
take
but
people
would you
over-
just keep it, do me a favor? I know everybody's dying to get their statements out, but can we just get the questions so that then give them time to answer? I want to get time for everybody to ask the question, okay?
Who do I go to try to get this service better for both parties?
Both parties, meaning you and.
Elder and
Oh,
disabled.
okay. So first, I would tell you to go to your city council member. Start there. Go to the chair of transportation at the city council. Then I would tell you.
David.
Then I would tell you to also reach out to the assembly member and also reach out to your state senators and write letters because we need to have a paper trail. And often people think that just a phone call is going to get things done. But as long as you have a paper trail, you can always take that paper trail and go back and refer to it. So my thing to you would be is after we're done, I'll give you my information and then, we'll take it from there. But we have to maintain visible. We have to reach out to the elected officials, and we even may have to even lobby.
This is Dara. I just want to add to that for everyone in the room. Everything that Martin said is correct. But you also can file a complaint with the United States Department of Transportation because the funding for that access comes from Department of Transportation. And they, by law, must keep a tracking of the complaints that your access gets. In DC, it's called Metro Access. So that's what I'm thinking in my head, but that's the access you're talking about. And from that, at the end of every year, there is a performance measurement standard done on every access around the country. And if your numbers go down, your funding goes down. And so they don't want to be bothered with that as well. And the last thing I'll tell you also is find yourself some disability advocates, which you got a whole bunch here in New York, the Centers for Independent Living, and they will assist you with getting what the services that should be done properly, but file that complaint with the United States Department of Transportation.
Thank
And
you.
file it every day. There's a campaign going on that people file a complaint every day.
Thank you. Okay.
Hello? I know a person that has a disability and was working a job, and SSA was contacting her boss 24/7, okay, about her pay stubs. And she used to bring her pay stubs. Every time she gets paid, she would bring her pay stubs to SSA, Social Security Administration. And they turned around and they was harassing her boss, and so she had to lose it. And the boss told her, the best thing for you to do is just leave the job. Now, she couldn't even go to...
Okay, let's, okay.
Okay,
the question.
The question is, where can she go to get another job?
Okay, so this is Dara again with the services. I know, right? I'll take that. Again, Centers for Independent Living, which you have one here in DC, in New York, in Brooklyn, all of the boroughs. They have services there to assist with finding jobs. As we all said here, it is very difficult. I'm not going to say it's easy. Please come and talk to me afterwards as well, and I'll try to get you in contact with there's some really good employment programs in Manhattan and in some of the boroughs. So I'll help you out and get you towards there. But I'm not promising anything. But the key also is that that young lady and every other person who does this needs to know their rights, so that things like what just happened to what you just said in the story don't happen. So that's another area. And the Centers for Independent Living teach advocacy, so you know your employment rights. So she and any other person out there who's having this problem needs to know their employment rights when they get into the job as well.
Thank you. Okay.
I want to address this to anyone, but Martin specifically also. Can you give us something like 3 to 5 or 3 bullet points that address the disability community the strongest, and then how and what you want us to do to support this? How can we push these bills through legislation or policy change, or exactly what do we do? Petition or like you just said a minute ago, emails or whatever? Organize. How can we organize to help you all? And then what would you suggest that would be the 3 strongest issues among any of you all as a whole?
Probably the 3 education, education, and employment, and housing. Those are probably the 3 biggest components. Now, as far as what you guys could do is, We need to
think
start, or
everybody
we
come
need to
around.
continue to have a grassroots movement to get people engaged and to get people educated. Education, information is the key. When you know better, you do better.
Can I
Thank
add
you.
one more thing?
Oh,
I would also, when you go into a meeting, when you're having a session, be it at work, be it in your communities, ask, is disability here? Are they at the table? Are they represented? Because I guarantee whatever issue you're talking about, disability groups, they have a point of view. And if you're not hearing it voiced, then they're probably not being represented right then in that room. And if you're not at the table, usually you're getting run over.
Yeah, but you, I need you with the mic. She's deaf, you need a mic, you need a mic, you need a mic, you need a mic.
With regard,
I got you the access.
with regard to access services. I have a friend who's a college-educated woman. And she's been trying to get a job for over a month. And another friend who doesn't have college education, but she's a very bright woman, and she's also been trying to get a job. And I'm just wondering, they both can't seem to find a job, and the counselors are saying, just wait, just wait. They've been doing what they can, preparing their resumes, going to various offices. They have, lots of different contacts ready, but it just keeps going on and on and on. So I've been hearing these two stories, and my question is, what do we do about the access services? Is there any way that I can get in touch with any one of you? Because there's something going on with these access offices that are supposed to be providing access to people with disabilities, but yet they go on and on year after year seeing people not getting jobs and don't basically do anything to help them get a job.
Okay. Again, Dara. This is Dara, D-A-R-A. And so I do the services up here. Yes, you are correct. It is unfortunate. Yes, please come and see me. The information is here, and you can email me or contact me. I want to let you all know, where are you from? Are you from New York? Yes. Okay. Okay, right. So so we'll talk about New York, but any person from anywhere in the country, let us know. There are places within the United States. But again, and I don't want to call my girl out here, you can file complaints with the Department of Labor. The U.S. Department of Labor needs to hear that access center is not doing its job. The more that the federal level here, and I know you guys do a lot of local work, and I think it's great, and that is what drives things, but don't forget your federal levels. You pay federal income tax. In fact, in the next 5 days, you better pay them, right? Because isn't April 15th somewhere down and around Wednesday? And you need to let the U.S. departments know what's going on, okay? So that's another area. But talk to me afterwards. I'll be here.
And also, real quickly, those of you, why don't you come join NAN? We have a deaf committee. We have a disability committee.
Hold on one second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. You can start again.
So for those of you who live in New York City, or for those of you who might live in, in other states, you should go to your nearest NAN chapter and become a member. So then that way we could fight together, So I would encourage you to join a committee or start a committee.
Right. Thank you. Right. Okay, next.
My name's Melvin. I have a college degree. I have a bachelor's in counseling. But I ended up working in the post office. So as you said, as Ms. Lewis said, TL, 70 or 80% of deaf people are winding up not working. I'm just wondering, how can this be? I got out of college in the 80s, and I don't understand why this is still going on, and how can we solve this problem?
I'm going to just wait till he gets seated so he can actually see the response. So I think we're starting the discussions. The problem really is that it's 2015 and we're just really starting the discussion. So had this discussion been started decades ago, I don't think we'd be in the situation where we are now. What we need is what we were talking about. I think Rebecca most poignantly put it. It's called disability solidarity, wherein disability justice or disability rights organizations, they start tackling issues surrounding racism, which is deeply entrenched in most disability rights organizations, let's be honest. Disability rights organizations are not doing what they're supposed to be doing as related to racial justice, and on the opposite end, racial justice organizations are not doing what they're supposed to be doing as related to disability justice. What we have then is an intersection wherein people with disabilities who happen to be black, brown, or some other marginalized identity are not being properly served. That's what we have now. In terms of solving that problem, I think we've started now. But really making people aware, I think that people with disabilities who are people of color are amazingly competent, wonderfully brilliant people, and that it's not that we are amazing, you know, in spite of our disability. I really hate that language, and that needs to be changed. We are amazing because of our disabilities. It's not in spite of, like, no pity. Disability is great, and our disabilities are what actually makes our whole person. So acknowledging our full identities, really, really crucial and critical to flipping this stigma. I don't even call it stigma, I call it discrimination, on its head within our black communities, our brown communities, and within the disability community as related to people of color and people who are black.
Okay, thank you.
She's taking my question.
The question, excuse me 1 second. There's a line here with the people with questions, so we're not going to have her, but there's a line, and so all of these people are waiting in line. If you want to ask a question, just get in line.
This is TL. I just want to make sure that our...
Just get in line.
One moment, please. Can I want to make sure that everything that we do here is centered on universal accessibility. So if, for example, someone cannot get to the line, please just raise your hand, and then we'll try to get to you. And I just want to make sure that we are not ableist in this space or autist in this space. If for some reason you can't understand what's going on, please let us know also. That's part of accessibility. And lastly, everyone should be saying their name before they say anything for people with low vision or who need to know added information. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Bailey. I'd like to know how can deaf people become leaders and become more politically active?
Can I? Also, you know, yeah.
So this is Dara. As they say, just do it. Just do it. There's no difference. TL just said it here. Just join. Martin told you, join NAN. Get some training, just like all the rest of us have had. You know, this doesn't come naturally. You need to learn things. Go to the training sessions that people have to train people about advocacy, about public policy, and about politics. Although they try to make you think that this stuff is hard, it is not. We are intelligent people, and this is very simple things that are going on. It may be a lot of research and a lot of things there, but it is not hard. But just join. Just go to any organization, get your advocacy training, get your activist training, learn how to protest. You must learn. There is a way in which to protest and do direct action. They also, teach you things happen. You will get arrested. But how to get arrested properly, how to be treated well, knowing your rights when you're in there, making sure you have people who will come and help you and know you're in there. And I only say this because of what TL does in her work and what we're talking about, because you are a person who is deaf. We have thousands of people who are deaf in the system who won't get an ASL interpreter and who won't get those kinds of things. But that's not to stop you or to be afraid. But just do it. Just get in there just like everybody else. Get some training and then take yourself out there, and we will help you and support you. That is what this community is about.
Okay, and let me just add to that, because the young lady that asked the question is already a leader in our House of Justice Deaf Club.
All right.
And I do want you to know that you see the House of Justice Deaf Club, the members have been here all week. We have been arrested. We have been advocates. And we have not only, it's not really fighting about deafness, we have been out there fighting because a black young man was killed. And so when everybody else was arrested with the National Action Network, so were the deaf. We were all in jail together.
That's right.
And when they asked about an interpreter, we said, we're only visiting, we're not staying. So we don't need an interpreter. Okay.
And I would like to say one thing, and also get familiarize yourself with Democratic clubs in your community. We need to start infiltrating, so then that way they could see that we exist too. We need to get involved with as many civic organizations or any other organization and Democratic clubs as possible.
This is Rebecca. I would definitely build on what Martin said. I was one of only 2 people on President Obama's Disability Policy Committee that were under the age of 35. And we inserted ourselves with the 2 words that scare most people over the age of 55 who are running the committee, which was social media. Who is running your social media? And they said, "Oh, please take it. We just don't want to worry about it." But the other individual and myself both ended up serving the president. Myself, as I was the chief diversity officer in the White House for 2.5 years. And the other individual is the youngest ever Senate-confirmed appointee, presidential appointee of the President of the United States, Mr. Ari Naaman. And Ari and I would not have had those opportunities had we not engaged on the campaign. A young woman of color who's from the deaf community herself, Leah Katz-Hernandez, is the ROTUS. The ROTUS is the receptionist of the United States. So the woman who is the receptionist for President Barack Obama is a young, multiracial deaf woman. And she got involved in the 2012 campaign. And so I would definitely agree with getting involved. You don't necessarily have to get arrested. I can tell you, I never have gotten arrested. I'm sure people have wanted to arrest me, though. But you're never too young to be a leader either. And I think that's something that's really critical. I think in a lot of our communities, they expect all of a sudden someone to come and tap you with a wand and say, okay, now you're a leader. Justin Dart was 19 when he founded the first pro-integration group at the University of Houston. Judy Heumann was 21 when she founded Disabled in Action in Berkeley. Ed Roberts was 22 when he founded the Rolling Quads at UC Berkeley. Jeff Rosen, who's my boss, who's the chairperson of the National Council on Disability, was in his early 20s when he was hanging off the flagpole at Gallaudet University when they shut it down because they wanted the first deaf president. It's kind of funny now that he's the chairman of a presidential commission. But so I don't want people to ever feel like you're not a leader if you're not, 35, have a doctorate, own a house, etc. You can lead at any age.
That's right. Thank you.
Can I just put in a really quick call? This is TL. A really quick call to action. Organizations who are trying to train young folks should make sure that all of their content is fully accessible. So that means making sure you have captions on your video, visual media content, and possibly providing interpreters as inset captions in some of them. Also making sure that rallies are accessible to people who are wheelchair riders. Making sure that protests are equally accessible to wheelchair riders as able-bodied walking folks. And also making sure that conferences like this are fully staffed with preferably deaf interpreters and sign language interpreters as we have here.
And you could also call, actually, you could Google up VESID, V-E-S-I-D. They train people with disability. So if you need any vocational training, that's a good, I would say that's a good place to start. VESID, yeah. V-E-S-I-D.
Right, thank you. Okay, next.
Yes, hi, my name is Ron Johnson. Thank you very much. Someone had talked about people being disabled not being seen on over here. I came in in the middle, but I just want to make a statement. Back when I was in college, Oh.
No, please ask a question, because I want to get to
Okay.
everybody
I got you.
behind
Well,
you.
well,
Thank
basically,
you.
basically see the person, not the disability. That's it.
This is
Okay.
Rebecca Coakley, and I need to jump in on that. I appreciate that comment, and I respect that it's coming from a good place. But I'm a little person. I'm a third generation little person. I am damn proud to be a little person. And so when I hear people say, and my colleagues can jump in at any point if they'd like to see the person and not the disability, or focus on the ability and not the disability, that dismisses a significant part of my personhood. That would be like saying, okay, you're a person, not a woman. You know, and
Or
to
all
me,
lives matter, not just
yeah.
Black lives.
You know, yeah, when I hear focus on the ability and not the disability, that's exactly how I feel. When I hear people say all lives matter versus the Black Lives Matter conversation. And so I think it's very important, and all the panelists here have talked about focusing on supporting the whole person. So I totally get what you're saying, and I get it comes from a place of support and respect. But that's where it's important to ask people, like, how they feel about things.
Right. Thank you. Okay.
No, that's right.
My name is Dr. Jones. I'm the Commissioner for the United Nations, and I'm also a person with disabilities. My question would be is, I'm reading here, we're talking about raising awareness for people with disabilities. And under Article 8, it states that you're supposed to raise awareness for people with disabilities underneath the Disability Convention. What is the United States doing to ratify the treaty besides just sign on it?
See, Boogie, that's all you.
Yeah.
You want that?
So, speaking from the Obama administration, there is full support for ratification of the treaty, and there will continue to be. The treaty we're talking about is the CRPD, or the Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disabilities. The CRPD is based on the ADA, so it's something that our country supports in its laws, but unfortunately, in the times that it's come to the Senate floor, it has not made it to ratification. And despite bipartisan leadership, despite support from veterans groups, from disability groups, despite Bob Dole being on the floor calling for the ratification, we still cannot get it done. And that's because, quite frankly, people are scared of treaties. There's a whole campaign of misinformation that took place in the last time that it came to the floor, where people said that because of this treaty, individuals are going to be able to come into your homes and take away your rights and take away the rights of students. And the reason why they got that information out is because of the type of campaigning and the organization that other groups are doing. So I think for us to be successful in getting this passed in the Senate, we need to be doing that same type of campaigning and organizations. When that happened, Homeschoolers Association, they won. They won because they made the calls, they wrote the letters, they visited they came to the Hill, they won. They were louder, and they had more organization than we did, despite all that support. So I hope to see it one day.
And this is Dara. So from the advocacy side, just so you all know, we have decided for the Congress, the 114th, which this is the 114th Congress for people who don't understand and know that. This Senate, which is now Republican-led, we will not be bringing this up because we just don't have the votes, and we cannot continue to destroy what the CRPD stands for, but we are doing things behind the scenes. If you'd like to join us, please let us know. We need to continue to educate the community about what CRPD is and where it stands for us in the United States. And I will say this in this room because we are people of color and from African descent. Our African brothers and sisters need the CRPD more than any continent in the world. The way in which people with disabilities are treated in African countries, and I love my Africa. Let it not be thought any different. It is horrific. And the CRPD will help, and if the United States is there to lead, we will help our brothers and sisters in Africa. That is, if no other reason you are in this room and want to help out, that is how you can help out with CRPD.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Naomi Jones. I would like to start my question by saying thank you for you all being here today because it gives me the courage to say out loud that I am disabled and homeless.
Well, not homeless, but I'm happy.
But the reality is that my medical condition contributes to my housing situation. And I am also an advocate. I am also highly educated. I graduated Regent Scholar from UCLA and then pursuing a master's degree in science from Columbia University. But yet and still, I have hardships. So I heard it mentioned earlier, Dara Baldwin had mentioned that she has access, her organization, to being able to go in unannounced anytime, any place. Because there are so significant injustices that happen for people who are getting funding, for people who are disabled. And they have posted on their government entities, oh, we apply to ADA. There's tons of law, the American Disabilities Act, but it doesn't happen. So how does an advocate get that status and or organizations get that status to be able to go in unidentified and or at any time?
So again, this is for Dara. Unfortunately, you cannot. That is a statute in law, in federal law, which took almost 7 years for them to get for the Protection and Advocacy Association. And I could tell you, in these Congress here it'll never happen. But you can come to us, the Protection and Advocacy. That's what we do. You file a complaint with us, and we can go in. But I will let you know, it probably, that's not really going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years with this leadership we have here. But come to me and we can talk about any people you're having problems with or issues with. But it's a federal statute that we have. It's not something we just went out and got. So there's no other organizations that can. No, there are no other lawyers, not even legal aid lawyers. Legal aid lawyers come to us. Because in order to go, like in a prison, right, your public defender, he or she has to make an appointment to see that client. And they only go in that one little room to talk to that client. Our lawyers do not, they can show up at the door, show their ID that they're to protect, and they can go inside. And they can walk anywhere in that facility, outside, inside. They can talk to the janitor. That's usually where we find the abuse. The staff tells you, they treat these people horribly. So that we are the only lawyers. When the immigrant children came here, the undocumented children came last summer, we were the only ones who could go into those detention centers, and I say in quotes, because they tried to call them institutions or places of housing these children. They were not. They were detention centers. And our lawyers were the lawyers who could go in and we could say to them, you cannot keep these children here. You cannot keep these families here. I don't care if they're immigrants or not. You cannot keep them here. And so we help Department of Homeland Security. Legal aid attorneys couldn't do it. The Latino community had to come to us, and we work with them right now. Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, California, and we go into those detention centers. We're the only people who can do that.
Okay, my name is Tanya. You probably answered this question already, but I'll ask anyway. Clearly, there is a lack of people of color with disabilities present at the table. So that's what Taryn said, and this is directed to Taryn and Daria. She was saying something about being present at the table, and I know that there is clearly a lack of people of color that are present at the table. So the question is it through training and joining an organization that people of color with disabilities are actually present at the table?
Oh, so yes, this is Dara, so I'll clarify. And at the table, I mean on a national level, federally. Locally, you'll see some people of color doing work like Martin and many of you and Nan. But on a national level, you're correct. And we all sit right here, and I think we're still trying to figure that out. We had 7 policy positions open in 2013. I got 1 job. All the rest went to people of Caucasian descent. And we sent them the resumes, and we told them we are friends with these people. They didn't even get interviews. So I don't know how that works. And it works just like I think any other industry. We just have to keep knocking that door down and keep sending them educated. Like this young lady who just stood up and said she's educated and is getting her master's degree. Come on down to DC. They need to see us. You know, just like I worked in diversity, cultural competency for pharmaceutical companies for many years. And that's how it was done. It was done through programs of internships and things like that. So that's how it will happen.
Okay, we only
Thank
can
you.
take three
Thank
more
you.
questions. And the young lady in the black jacket is the last question.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, my name's Ike Killams.
Williams.
Oh, Williams, sorry, Williams. I have a license for as a locksmith. I'm just waiting. I took 2 years to get my training, and then I looked for a job. I had my resume all prepared. And when the man took my resume to apply as a locksmith, he just turned me down. And every time I went for a job, this would happen. I had all my qualifications, my certifications, my licenses. Now, you guys mentioned FECID. I went through this experience of failing to get a job after many, many applications to the point where I gave up. Now I'm a manager. I work as a locksmith, mainly with deaf clients, but also I have a lot of hearing clients as well. I started my own business. Thank you.
This is Dara. I commend you, and that is one of the areas that Taryn and I worked on when she was at Senator Harkin's office. The way in which women and people of color got out of poverty was through owning their own businesses. And entrepreneurship is the key to us getting out of poverty. My grandmother and my grandfather both own their own businesses. And so that is how we got out. And Senator Harkin did some really great work in the new Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act. There's some language in there in reference to entrepreneurship. But here's one of these barriers we were talking about. The young lady was talking about SSA a few minutes ago. If you're on SSA, you cannot go to the Office of Small Businesses and get a loan. Why? You have no collateral. You have no value, right, to get a loan. So those are some of the things that we have to break down, these barriers, so that people with disabilities can start their own businesses. But entrepreneurship is one of the ways in which many people in this country, immigrants, women, and people of color, got out of poverty. And I believe that is the way people with disabilities will get out, especially with the way in which technology is going these days.
Thank you. Okay, next, and then we have one more. Marcelette will be the last. Okay.
Hello, my name is Stephen Autry. This is for humanity and the people themselves. I believe they would like to know what laws cover the disability of people that needs your help.
Oh, the laws?
Yes, what laws?
This is Dara. There are several. The Americans with Disabilities Act. You have IDEA.
Can we just ask for clarification on the question, please?
Oh, go ahead.
Can you say that again, please?
I was asking what laws covers the people that need your help that is present and future that we can look up and go to.
So the most comprehensive disability rights, this is TL, the most comprehensive disability rights law is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was passed in 1990 and amended in 2008. That's the law that you most often would be looking to if you're looking to regulate private businesses and state state and local government agencies. If it's a federal agency that you'd like to file a complaint against or what have you, you're looking usually, but not always, at the Rehabilitation Act, which was passed a couple decades earlier. So that's the gist, and if you need more information, I'm happy to share more with you offline.
Okay. We're going to have one more question, and then if you want to speak with the panelists after this, you'll be free to do that. But we're really way over time. Okay.
I'm Marcelette. The Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities hosted a job fair. Lots of disabled and deaf people went to that fair. They brought their resumes and everything. They came prepared. After a month, not even one of us even heard from the people who gathered there accepting resumes. So I went back to the mayor's office and I said, "You hosted that job fair. I've heard absolutely nothing. How can it be? You know, we don't even know if our resumes just needed some extra work or if there was some way that we could improve our chances. We heard absolutely nothing."
Question?
So the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities isn't fully accessible. The fair itself wasn't really accessible.
Mm-hmm.
We are frustrated. We're frustrated with them. So what should I do now?
So-
That's my question.
So I would say to you to reach out to the commissioner, Victor Calise. Calise is Calise. His email address is vcalise@cityhall.nyc.gov. Again, vcalise@cityhall.nyc.gov, or you could call him at 212-7. I'm sorry. Sure. So the commissioner for people with disability at the mayor's office, his name is Victor Calise, Calise. His contact information is 212-788-2835. His email address is vcalise@cityhall.nyc.gov.
Okay. Thank you.
And then this is TL. We do not have the protection and advocacy authority to walk into institutions without notice, but what we do, all of us, have is what's called a FOIA authority. So if there's a government agency in the FOIA, F-O-I-A, Freedom of Information Act, if there's a government agency in your state or wherever that you question their actions, so for instance, you're not sure if they were just setting up this job fair for their own purposes, you're not sure if whatever agency you're dealing with is being appropriate, you can issue FOIAs requesting information. That is all available on every single state's websites on how to do that. It's usually written in plain language, and it's usually if you call the government agency in charge of disability rights, you should be able to get in contact with somebody who can translate or whatever is necessary for access to that information. and it really works well.
Okay, we have a lot ahead of us. As I start off saying, this is only the beginning, and I certainly thank all of you for participating, and certainly thank and appreciate the panel who really came with a wealth of information. And can we give them a big hand?
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
This is starting the discussion. This is starting the discussion. And I do believe, I don't only believe, but I'm going to make it happen, is that this is the beginning, but that there will be more discussions on this topic. So thank you. Everybody have a blessed afternoon. Get home safe. Thank you.